I love guidance. Okay. Rules. There are none. Have fun and be yourself. Introduce yourself. Okay. Well, I'm Jess. I'm from New Jersey. I feel like that's a very defining quality of mine. I've been in Pittsburgh now for 8 years. I went to school here and then moved back to New York, and then something pulled me back. And I guess as far as what I do, I am a writer. I love to eat and I turn that into my job. I work in social media, so I'm always on both my phones. And I also sell vintage. I live in the South Side, which I love. And I'm a Gemini, which I feel like will probably come up in a lot of these questions. I love to yap. I'm emotional. Um, and yeah, I'm excited to be here, but I am a little nervous. Okay, let's get into it. I'm pretending like I'm on my own podcast or something right now.
You basically are.
I love that. On a scale from 1 to 10, how authentically are you living right now, online and offline? Ooh. Starting off strong. I feel like this is, it's not just an easy answer. I feel like, we talked a little bit about it before. I think, especially when talking about online and offline, I will say offline, I do feel like I'm a 9.5. I don't believe in being perfect. And I feel like someone said this in a interview of yours that I had watched. Oh, maybe it was Presley. She talked about being authentic, and she said the quote that my dad always tells me about: when you think you're done learning, you never should really feel that way. I'm butchering the quote, but I feel like, especially in the space of learning a lot about myself, I'm in a space of, I learn something new about myself every day. And I think instead of using that as something that scares me, it's something that really empowers me. So I would say offline, definitely above a 9. But, when I first read this question, to me, I was like, oh, I don't want the answer to be wrong, or I don't want how I'm living online or offline to, not be right. And as I said before, I'm definitely my hardest critic. And I know a lot of people tell me that, but I don't necessarily think that's a negative thing. I feel that I hold myself to a really high standard, and that is something that I love about myself. And I would say, kind of as far as online, I feel that I don't want to equate a number to it. I feel like I show up authentically online, but I think it's important to differentiate between tying authenticness to talking about everything that you're going through and everything that you're feeling versus, how do you post that? Do I post that? How do I share that? And I know one thing that we talked about, and you said there are questions in here about writing, but I do feel really proud of myself for being authentic in how I'm writing. And I find that social media in general isn't always, the truth or real. A lot of it is a highlight reel. Especially in the last few months, I feel like I've turned a lot of hard times and hard feelings and hard realizations into content that, might not necessarily to someone else look like that's what I'm doing, that I'm turning a negative into a positive. But I am. And I feel like in my writing, it's a little bit clear that how I'm showing up in that way, there's a backstory to that. So, long story long, I'm proud of myself for how I'm showing up authentically online and offline. And I'm excited to, kind of continue the shift that I feel like I'm going through personally and seeing how that evolves my brand. Okay, next question. What made you start Hungry Jess in the first place? Did you ever think it would become what it is now? I will say that I started it when I was 19, so I didn't really think beyond a semester at a time. I was a sophomore in college, and I went to Pitt. That's what brought me to Pittsburgh. I was studying nonfiction writing and communications, and that summer I was going to intern at Food Network magazine. So I wanted to impress everyone there. And this was 2014, 2015. It was it was not now. So social media was very different then. It was before TikTok, it was before Reels. I believe Instagram stories had just been introduced. So it was a very different landscape for how people approach social media. So when I started the Instagram at the time, that's what it had started as. It was Hungry Girl Big City, but no I in girl, as an ode to my AOL screen name from when I was growing up. It was interesting because a lot of people didn't understand the purpose. I had a lot of close friends that said, I don't really know what you're doing, but I'll follow you along anyway. And I don't know what the actual draw to start it was, other than I feel like it was right at the cusp of when, everyone was starting to make a food Instagram. And I mean, it's important to note that at that time, it wasn't a brand. It wasn't something that I was like, this is gonna, the term influencer was not really a thing. So yeah, I started it just so I could go to my internship. Hopefully they would hire me on the spot. They didn't, but I had a great summer. And oh, okay, so this ties into the next question. Did you ever think it would become what it is now? No idea. In all the ways. Not to be cliche, but starting that has, changed my life. Especially being Hungry Girl, Big City, and then, going through college and graduating. I remember being in the bathroom at the bar at school and, people would come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, it's Hungry Girl. Like, I always think like this is a Hungry Girl moment, or like this is something Hungry Girl would do. Like, and it kind of just became this thing that people would associate me with, and that, it was easier to grow a following then. It kind of was, you didn't have to fight to get seen online. Quality of content was very different then than it is now. So, it was easy to get 1,000 likes, or not that it's about the likes, but it was easier to get visibility. Now I feel like it's a little bit harder. And it just was born from this place of, excitement, and the brand was very, I was 19, 20, and then 21. So it was very fries before guys, don't drunk text your ex, like, and then I started weaving myself into the brand. And I had a friend who was a graphic designer, and she wanted to add some things to her portfolio. So she actually asked if she could make me some logo options. And that's kind of where the first iteration of my logo came from. It's influenced by Sex and the City, which the current iteration of my logo, now that I'm Hungry Jess Big City, is still kind of a riff on that, just a little bit different. I'm a little bit more elevated, and I had no idea what it would become. And to think that it's, my business now, and it's what I'm able to do with my life and grow it how I want to grow it. If I want to sell vintage and create a sub-brand under Hungry Jess. But I think my favorite thing about the brand is the community. I have people that still follow me that aren't my friends that feel like they have to still follow me. They follow me 10, 12 years later. I turned 30 in June, so seeing the evolution from 19 to 30, and there are people that are still here and cheering me on, and, sometimes I share things and, it resonates with people, and it's not just about food, it's so much more than that. And I'm really proud of that. And I had no idea that it would evolve into what it is now. So I love that question. Ooh, okay. Spicy. Do people know the real you or just Hungry Jess? Does it ever feel performative? Ooh. I feel like especially now that I'm no longer in my 20s, I think a big lesson that I've learned is A, just keeping my circle small. B, not everyone is entitled to the real you. I've become very protective of who I show who I really am to, especially not being from Pittsburgh, but living in Pittsburgh for most of my adult life. After school, I moved here when I was 23. So, those are a lot of defining years. I've obviously, learned showing people who I really am, and it's life, relationships end. And I mean, work relationships, friend relationships, romantic relationships. I do approach things in the sense of just showing up as me. But as I said, I'm also a Gemini. So the me that I was when we met for coffee at 10 a.m. could be very different. And I feel like it is a little different from the me that is sitting here right now. It's always going to shift and change. I've always felt like, even in my teens, and I don't feel that I was able to identify what it was until later in my 20s, that what I'm feeling, my energy is so strong that when it enters a room, people notice it maybe before I do. And I feel like when I was in my early teens, and this is something I know that probably a lot of people have felt, but I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. I didn't know that it was okay to be emotional. I didn't know that it was okay to have bad days, or, if someone was perceiving my energy and or my mood one way, that it wasn't necessarily a reflection of them. It was a reflection of me. So when it comes to, knowing the real me or just hungry Jess, I feel like that's such a complex question with not a definitive answer, because there are so many versions of me. And to an extent, I guess I'll answer it in, yes, I do feel that to an extent, hungry Jess can feel performative, but also at the same time, as I'm growing as a person, I feel that my brand is also growing as a person. And to me, showing up authentically is, being as real as possible, but also protecting my peace and not, it's no one else's business. I can control the narrative. So that in itself feels a little bit performative. But also at the same time, I don't think that's a bad thing, because at the end of the day, protecting my peace and accepting that I'm not able to control how people perceive me, that's what I need at the end of the day. But with that said, I do really try to bridge the two, the who I am in real life and how I show up online. And, if someone else feels it's performative or it's not accurate, then that's okay. It's not, I can't control how other people perceive me in that way. All I can do is my best. Especially, the way I approach seeing a friend is not the same way I'm going to approach seeing a client. And that's okay. But I definitely think social media can feel performative. I'll frame it that way. But kind of, again, I don't necessarily feel like it's a bad thing or it's something I'm ashamed of to sometimes not be 100%. Oh, this is what I'm going through. This is why I'm sad. Or, same thing as withholding, really good news or happy news. I feel like my inner circle, which I'm, so grateful to have, they they understand and see the real me. Do you ever feel stuck in the identity you've created? Have you changed over the years? Has your brand evolved with you? No, I don't. I don't feel stuck in the identity I've created, because my identity is me. And as I've said, I'm very comfortable with how I evolve and how I change and how I show up. I feel that in certain relationships, I've been made to feel like I have to shrink myself. I can't show up as vibrantly or as loudly or as talkative or as opinionated or this or that as maybe I want to. And kind of, as I talked about, the fact that that can change. I can be silent and listen, and that could be a mood that I'm in. Or, I can talk a lot and, be really high energy and be really, really loud. And those are all good things. And I feel like something I am very proud of is I don't feel stuck in the identity I've created. I think a big part of that is also changing my brand from Hungry Girl to Hungry Jess and really embracing that. Especially now that I'm 30, I'm glad that Hungry Girl is something that I've parted with. And that, that's it. My name is in my brand. So I show up as myself. I am my brand. My brand is me. I actually have my logo tattooed. So, and I have a knife right here. Yeah, so I feel very tied together, and I feel like this kind of goes back to, when I created Hungry Jess, that it came from who I was at the time. And, my brand is a little less, fries before guys, drunk texting, because now I'm usually in bed by 10 with a face mask on. But at the same time, a lot of people have grown with me. I did just look at my analytics, and my target audience right now is 28 to 44, which I love. And, that's me. As I keep bringing up, I turned 30 in June, and I feel like this has been a very transformative year for me. So this channel's into the next question. I've changed a lot over the last few years. I've changed a lot since I turned 30 in June, I just wrote about in my Substack how I've changed a lot over the last 55 days. We're 55 days into this year. And I write something I'm grateful for every day. I call it page X of 365. And I do that because I was a very, very different version of myself day one versus the me that I am now. And I'm so proud of that. And it's interesting that I've, have gotten messages or, comments from people saying, you're glowing and you look so happy and I love what you're doing. And I've definitely been a little bit more on the repost button with things. Not necessarily sharing things to my Instagram story, but you can repost things. So I've just been going off with the repost button when I see something that resonates with me, which I'm so glad I've curated my feed to be, all those things. And someone actually messaged me last night and said, I just have to say, I love everything you've been reposting. It's so empowering. And I actually was talking with one of my therapists about, this year and what my goals are and what I've been working on. And she said, I feel like your word for this year is empowering. You're being very intentional, but you're being very true to yourself. So I feel like this also ties in the last question too. I don't feel stuck, and I am so grateful for that. And I don't really have, time to stop evolving because I do so many different things and, trying to live in the moment and celebrate that. But I also embrace the fact that I've changed over the years and that my brand has changed with me. So yeah, I love change. I think, especially going through bigger changes, sometimes what you can't control can feel scary, but I'm really learning to sit in that and understand why I feel those ways and let go of what I can't control. Speaking of writing, talk to me about your passion for writing. Is that where you process your emotions? Ooh, love this question. I actually just reposted a quote and I'm going to butcher it, but the basis of it was I write because I don't know what I feel until I read what I wrote. And that really resonated with me. As I said, I've been writing one thing a day that I'm grateful for, but it's more so just one thing I loved about that day, one thing I'm proud of myself for that day, one thing I learned that day, one thing I would like to change that day. And I feel like doing things like that is definitely a space where I process my emotions. Even my Substack, I feel like I write that for me, but also, for anyone else that might be feeling similarly. I started writing when I was a freshman in college. And writing wasn't always something I had a passion for. I actually hated writing in high school, but I didn't want to write 5-paragraph essays. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write. And I feel like really early on, I developed my own brand voice. This was before I watched Sex and the City. So, kind of before I understood that, the narrative that Carrie has in her head that you hear throughout the show, that's something that I had when I started writing in college. And I was able to write really fun pieces in college. And, I got a lot of feedback from people that would read my articles and say, you're such a good writer. I love reading what you have to write. So that kind of fueled me to develop it more. I think there is a difference between writing publicly and writing just for yourself. I'm not a big journaler, I will say, or I guess in a way I haven't really found a traditional way of journaling that fits me. I kind of like being able to, write the page X of 365 day note. That's been a really good practice of mine, I guess, in a way that's journaling. But yes, writing is where I process my emotions, especially as someone that changes their mind a lot, especially as someone that has a lot to say, especially as someone that I don't like the term overthinking, but I do think a lot. It's just the way that I feel like I can show up for me and be the little person in my head, the little Carrie Bradshaw or the Lizzie McGuire figure in my head and, put pen to paper or type something out. And I do want to write a book one day. So I feel that with writing, and granted, I do write in professional ways. I write about food. I do some ghostwriting. I write blog posts for other clients. And I feel like with my clients, I'm kind of able to wear the brand voice umbrella that, I feel like what a lot of clients trust me for. But I feel like for myself, I've really learned not to be too hard on myself and not to put really harsh deadlines on when I write or how I show up in my writing. because it always comes easily when it's meant to. What are you learning to love about yourself? Ah, so much. So much. And I feel like a version of me, maybe even a year ago, would think that that's such a cringe, weird, not okay thing to say. But I think it's amazing to love yourself. And I didn't realize how much I didn't love myself until I let go of a lot of external love that I thought I was getting. But, ooh, um, yeah, I feel like I'm relearning to love things about myself that the me of my early 20s wouldn't think twice about. And in a sense, that breaks my heart, but also at the same time, that makes me so happy that I'm doing it now because better late than never. I love being alone. We'll start there. I love being with myself in my own space. I have really curated my apartment to be a reflection and extension of me. And I love existing in it. I love if it takes me 5 days to do the dishes or I forgot to take the garbage out this morning, but it's my space. And I love that I can control that. I love that I change my mind. I love that I change my mind. I love that I overthink and I have a lot of thoughts. And I feel like I was in a space where someone else made me second guess the fact that I love that about myself. And I love that I'm taking my power back to be able to love things about myself that maybe someone else didn't. And that's okay. I don't need other people to love every aspect about me. But it's important to realize that just because someone else feels that way does not mean that I have to feel that way about myself. I love how loud I am. I love how many different thoughts I have. I feel as someone that has a lot of thoughts and does a lot of different things career-wise, it's easy to second guess an idea or a thought that I have and think, oh, that's silly, that's stupid. Maybe I should keep that to myself. But I feel like I'm really leaning into the worst. The worst that could happen is it doesn't work out, or the worst someone can say is no. I love how independent I am. And I feel like my definition of independence has really evolved over the last few months. And I feel that, especially coming off of Valentine's Day and, you know, just a lot of love in a lot of different ways. I really love, and I've always felt this way, and this is what I'm most excited about working on, but I love the relationship that I have with myself. And I love that that's something that will continue to grow and change. And that's something that I never won't have. And that's something that I'll always put first. I'm learning to love taking up space and not dimming my light. And also, I'm learning to love that I give myself everything I want. Final thoughts already. This was really therapeutic. I loved this. Final thoughts. I do a lot of reflecting. I feel like just understanding how fast time is going, especially talking a lot about, especially the last birthday that I've gone through or the last few months. And I do a lot of reflections. And, there's no constants in life, but I feel like being the saddest I've ever been and the happiest I've ever been in the last less than 2 months is something that's crazy to process. But I'm excited to, keep feeling my emotions. And I feel like these questions have, helped solidify that I have confidence in myself and I'm proud of how I'm showing up in spaces. And, I love every version of myself. And I don't know, I'm excited to see where all my personalities go.
Thank you, Jess.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
How was it for you?
Oh my God, I loved it.